Hi, this is Damien Marie AtHope, and I'm an axiological atheist, and which can be understood simply as a value theory or a value science atheist. And I'm here with two guests. Could you go ahead and tell us your name and what kind of atheist you are?
Hi, my name is Valerie. Whoa, I'm getting bad feedback. Sorry.
Sorry, it sounds okay on my end. It's in my...
I don't know that I can do it though. Let's see.
That's fine. It's gone.
Oh, what happened?
Oh, you fixed it. Magic.
Magic, okay.
Well, we don't believe in magic, but go ahead.
My name is Valerie Tarico, and I'm a former evangelical. I sometimes call myself a spiritual non-theist instead of an atheist because it forces people to ask me what that actually means. And what I tell them then is that I don't believe in any kind of supernaturalism. And I think that our gods are human-made. And I also believe, though, that questions about meaning and morality are at the very heart of what it means to be human.
Right on. Thank you. And could you tell us your name also, the other guest, and tell us what kind of atheist
my name
you
is
are?
Karen Garst, and I would pretty much agree with how Valerie characterized it. Usually I just say I'm an old fart atheist.
Right on.
And what I'd like to do is introduce the book. And first of all, I want to say thank you, Damien, and thank you, Valerie, for coming on today. Damien was nice enough a year or so ago to have me on for my first book, Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion, and for some reason I couldn't stop. And I had the opportunity at a Women in Secularism conference and through other means. I think I knew about Valerie Tarico's blog a long time ago. And I put together in this book 13 women who talk about the impact of religion on women from different perspectives. Valerie will talk about, and she's going to talk about that today, particularly the Abrahamic tradition, the Bible. But I also have Candace Gorham. And most of these, I'm not going to mention all the books, but most of these women either have a blog or have authored a book. Candace Gorham talks about, she's a mental health practitioner, so she talks about mental illness and what religion can cause and shame and guilt. Lori Weissman talks about traditional Judaism. Alexis Reckert talks about being raised in the Accelerated Christian Education Program. And if you haven't seen that, it is amazing. Valerie, you and I are supposed to be in the kitchen. That's our job.
I am in the kitchen. I am.
Wait a minute. I can't be in the kitchen?
For the first time, I have an ex-Muslim, Hiba Sheh, is a Syrian expatriate. She was born and raised in Aleppo in a conservative Muslim family. And that was really interesting to learn about the role women played before Muhammad. And actually, Muhammad's wife was a caravaner, very successful businesswoman. Then Aruna Papp is in Canada, and she was raised in India. And she was raised as a Christian. But that culture is amazing. She, when she was a small girl, looked across and saw somebody she knew next door to her, a girl, being immolated, set on fire because she had shamed the family. No police, no intervention, nothing. So she was able to escape all that, but it's a very tragic story. Then we have two African Americans, Valerie Wade and Deanna Adams, who talk about, slavery. What was it like in Africa? And there were goddesses and there were queens in Africa. So they not only gave up the female divine, they also became slaves. So that, double whammy. And they divide that up and do a really good job of that. Then Marilyn DeLasia, who was born in Guatemala, talks about the impact of what it is to be Hispanic Latino and have those issues in addition to being a woman, in addition to religion, particularly Catholicism weighing down on you. Hypatia Alexandria she renamed herself after one of my favorite women, Hypatia Alexandria from Egypt. And she and her husband are very active in the national Hispanic secular community.
Cool.
then Kaylin Marguerite Whalen, works for the National LGBTQ Task Force. She's a transgender woman, so you have that aspect added. Abby Hale, Valerie and I did a podcast with her the other day. She's a biology professor, and she talks about evolution, and it's fascinating. And the other day we learned that there's a eukaryotic cell that has 7 sexes. So number 1 can mate with the other 6. Number 2 can mate with the other 6. So they can mate with 85% of the population versus 50%. So it was fascinating. And then Greta Vosper is an author, and she's a minister in Canada. And she's an atheist, and now she has a community. When she declared she was an atheist, some people left, some people stayed. She built a new community, and now, of course, the national church is giving her a bad time. Very brave women. So this book is called Women versus Religion, a case against faith and for freedom, and it is available for pre-order on Amazon. So I will stop there. It comes out June 1st.
Wonderful. It sounds great. And I'm definitely interested in a lot of those topics. I am a feminist myself. I actually was a feminist before I knew what the word was, because it happened as a child. Seeing how my father abused my mother, I just hated it. And from then on, I wanted to champion women's empowerment, emancipation, freedom, whatever. And then later, I learned, was actually helped when I was 17 by a feminist therapist. And actually, I should have gone to Brea Psych in a 72-hour lockdown because I was that violent. And she just stopped and said to me, I see that you're hurting. I see no one's ever listened to you, and I'm listening to you. I'm gonna care. She just gave me such kindness, and it really impacted me. Then when I went to counseling, I really started looking at feminist theory, not just feminism, but like as it relates to how to psychologically help even men. Because I actually, I'm genderqueer and intersex mildly, but I'm basically consider myself a man. And it was so impactful to me to be treated with that kindness. And now I'm a pretty rough guy, but I really promote a lot of kindness, and it's definitely because of feminist theory. So anyways, I'd like to hear from Valerie. Could you go ahead and tell us your insights?
Absolutely. What would you like to hear about?
Well, anything that you liked so far, or anything that you feel should be added.
Well, it's interesting because right now there's a lot of controversy around feminism in our country, right? And what you have at one end is there are men who still think that women should be barefoot in the kitchen. Essentially, we have men preaching that God made man in his own image and that woman was made from a rib and is intended to be his helpmeet. In my chapter in Karen's book, I cite horrendous Bible verses and quotations from church leaders, starting with the founding or the kind of patriarchs and kind of progressing right on down to the present in terms of horrible things that they say about women. And at the same time, we have, culture doesn't move in synchronism. It's not synchronized. It doesn't move of a piece. And in some very kind of liberal strongholds, what we have, I think, is situations where women who are angry about this multimillennial history of patriarchy and oppression are getting a little payback, is how I kind of think of it, that they're dehumanizing men, and particularly sort of expecting that guys around them or guys in the media or on social media somehow can pay for the sins of our ancestors and the sins of their fellow males. And so, we see that kind of swirling around us in the context of the Me Too movement, which I personally think is long overdue. And yet I also think that when people erupt because they're tired of something, when they say time's up, they don't always do it in a way that is fair, right? I mean, people who are angry, people who feel violated, lash out. And sometimes that's not always proportionate. Sometimes people end up kind of having reactions that aren't really about them. And so I just think this whole topic of feminism is particularly fascinating right now because there is so much complexity in it. I describe myself as a feminist, as you do, but there's a lot of complexity right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to clarify for anyone listening. I consider myself an anarcho-feminist, which is an anarchist feminist. I see as feminism as just, for me personally, just part of anarchism. Because anarchism to me is that all people are equal and own themselves equally. And thus, women are equal to me by default. So I'm just want to clarify for anyone that uses the words and terms in different ways. That's what I am. And to me, a woman will never be free until she's free in the home. Not just in the streets, not just in the government, but in the home. If they don't, and I don't even mean just the wife. I'm talking about the girls being treated in a way that's respectful and equal. That's the fact to me that a system is set up where everyone can't wait to have a boy. They want to have a boy automatically means that being a girl, not just having a girl, but the act of being a girl is somehow innately not as good. And I just feel that is vile. In fact, even my last name is AtHope. It's a name me and my wife came up with because I hate patriarchy so much. I was not going to have my wife take my name, nor, of course, was I going to take hers. Ridiculous both ways to me. So I said, let's make something that matters to both of us. Something personal, something that's meaningful. And I said, you know what I really want to give people more than anything is hope. So.
So what do you think, I would say to Damien and Valerie, what do you think the major impediments to that are? We, all three of us are talking about religion, and I often say that I think religion is one of the last cultural barriers to gender equality. But how would you perceive some of the barriers that exist in, let's just say, the United States to be able to achieve the hope that you want, Damien?
Well, first off, sexism is a threat to men. So because it's a threat to men, and men are a place of power, it's always going to be a threat to power. Anything that's a threat to power will obviously be something that someone wants to destroy. So I feel like that what you're doing and what I keep trying, I have like 20 blogs on feminism. Nobody knows about it because then nobody cares about what I say. But I'm getting through to some people. Oh no, don't worry. A radical I am. And believe me, I'm not going to be silent. Because I know this, well-behaved people do not make change in history. You name a person in history, I'm going to tell you that's someone who said, you know what? I'm going to do what is right, regardless, period. I'm not asking permission. I'm not waiting for you to open a door. I'm going to break it down if I have to, because rights are that important. I just think, what human action has happened in silence? People don't wake up one day that have power and go, you know what? I need to give power back to everyone. It just doesn't happen. So I would say, Valerie, I'm not talking for you. I'm just saying for myself. To me, it's education. To me, it's speaking out again and again and again until they can hear nothing but it in their nightmares, in their dreams, that everyone, and that includes different races, colors, genders, it doesn't matter. Everyone is equal. That's my thing.
Karen, you asked what the most critical factor is obstructing equality. And I want to say that for me, strongly, feminism is about equality. I have no interest in flipping who's on top when it comes to race, when it comes to, countries, when it comes to gender. I feel like what drives me is the idea to us all being in this together, kind of in a way that is inclusive and fair. And, I think that, that men too are harmed by gender scripts and by being forced into these sort of narrow confines in terms of what they are expected to be and to do and to feel. And so I'm really interested in this all, as Damien said, being able to be who we are, and being free doesn't just mean free from constraints. It also means being empowered, having the tools, having the information, having the resources to really become the best self of our choosing. So I personally think that religion does act as one of the biggest barriers to gender equality. And that is because religion is inherently conservative. It seeks to encode and sanctify the cultural and social prescriptions and scripts of, in the case of Christianity and Judaism and Islam, our Iron Age ancestors, right? So those texts that emerged during the Iron Age came out of places that were highly hierarchical. They were very violent. People were living, many of them, much more hardscrabble lives. More of them died at the hands of other humans than do now, if we kind of look at the work that Steven Pinker has done. And what the Bible does and the derivative religions, including Mormonism and Islam, what they do is they basically put God's name on the cultural and social agreements of our Iron Age ancestors. And those agreements very much they go fundamentally to the principle might makes right. So if you look at it, I mean, of course, the Bible teaches a lot about compassion, mercy, forgiveness, charity, this benevolence, but but that's very different, kind of hoping for a benevolent hierarchy or benevolent patriarchy, with God on top and then man and then woman and child and slave and other species, right? Having the aspiration to have that be kind of compassionate and benevolent is very different than the idea of upending that and having us be equal, right? The idea of those people who are on the bottom actually having full and equal personhood rights. So if you look at the kind of the way that the Bible's laws play out and then the way the stories play out, that's really what it's about, is might makes right. It derives, I think, all the way back from the fact that men are physically stronger than women.
Well, and I say a lot in my presentation that it was all downhill after agriculture. When you look at hunter-gatherers in the Paleolithic or even today, there are some tribes in Africa that anthropologists study. They were much more egalitarian, it is thought, and certainly observations of those today, you can observe what happens today. But one of the primary differences is there wasn't any private property. And once agriculture started, there was I'm going to fence in this land. It's my land. It's not your land. And I want it to go to my son. And so my wife has to be a virgin when she marries me, so I can be sure it's my son. She can't commit adultery, etc. And religion and power, there was no such thing as secular power. It was religion. There was the head, and it was all together. And I think that it would have been difficult to get people to come together to fight had they not had that. It's almost like we're the right ones. This is our God. They don't believe it. So it's okay to kill them. And that offer of an afterlife and heaven also led into that because, well, it's a big deal because you're fighting for God and you're going to go to heaven. And I often look back at that and wonder, was there an alternative? Could we not have built defenses around the land? Could we have shared? Could we have something that was built on sharing, communication versus violence and aggression? And I don't know. I often say that if we would have descended from the bonobos instead of the chimps, we would have probably had a better chance, because they go, oh, you want my land? Sure, but can we have sex first? Yeah. Is there enough for dinner? Oh, let's have sex instead. So their whole structure of that species is not based on that hierarchy and one-upsmanship, which is fascinating. So anyway, I'll let the two of you comment on that.
Well, so my area that I'm most interested in as far as religion has to do with 5,000 years up to 1 million. I like the old stuff. I always want to know why. How do we get here? Why did we get here? So to me, the most interesting thing that I learned by studying that is that everything starts out feminine. In a sense, our DNA, in a sense, when we genetically or whatever, we start off like a default of basically almost like female. In a sense, that X makes a woman. So what's interesting, so every man in a sense has an X. They just have a stuff that they have the anti-feminizing androgens, they have the masculizing androgens, and they have the testosterone, introduction. But still the facts are, in a sense, the default, which actually was one of the most profound things I learned in college that made me start doubting the Bible. Wait a minute. Everything starts as a female. Well, then the Bible's wrong. I was like, done. Like, who didn't know this? Like, doesn't everybody say this? I mean, that was profound to me. But I wanted to say too is that everyone has this flawed opinion, because to me, everyone looks at religion from our eyes now and looks this way. They don't look at it from my view, from looking at when it started in superstition and then merged into religion and then merged. So what I see is that it's about 500,000 to 300,000, the Homo erectus started collecting rocks that had human faces. To me, it's pre-anism. And then by about 250, the Neanderthals, who actually come from, in a sense, the Homo erectus, and certainly their tools match, there's at least, if nothing else, shared transfer of ideas. So, and the Homo erectus is believed to also talk. The Neanderthals is believed to be able to talk, and they also were bearing ceremonially. So then what we're different though than the Neanderthals is we're more feminine. I read a whole article on this. Amazing. I didn't know. We're thinner. We're more, a lot of the attributes and things, social bonding. So the Neanderthals only had 15 to 30 groups in sense in general. Very small, like, little tiny clans. And humans were more like 50, 100, 300. And you could tell this one thing in the DNA, how humans behave with Neanderthals, because there's almost exclusively female DNA, which means I'm assuming we were raping a lot of people, which is really sad. Humans have never been, in a sense, like you were talking about, real great at respecting the boundaries of others, like that they own their own bodies. But it's interesting though, at some point though, 100,000 humans at burial probably learned it, I assume, maybe from the Neanderthals, because at 120, they're already burying humans in a Neanderthal style. But anyways, over in Israel. But so the thing though is the first, like the oldest in a sense, burial of a shaman is a female, 30,000 in Siberia. The next one is 14,000 in Israel, also female. Then you have one in Germany, and also at 9,000, also female. Then you have one in Czechoslovakia, Republic, or something is Bosnia or somewhere. It's also it's like I think 8,000 by 7,000. So it's all female, 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 female. To me, I have a summation that possibly was all female. I don't think that every figurine means a goddess, because to me, before the agriculture, like you're talking about, they didn't have gods. They had ancestors and whatever spirits or things. But so it's amazing how female religion was female centric at least. So for a long time, then about 7,000, you see the burials start to be different. Wait a minute, people are starting to gender their burials, a little bit different for female, a little bit different for male, although they stay relatively the same. But as it gets down to 5,000, the burials are completely different. Women get like a little rock. The men get this whole, thing. I think it was, I'm talking about Spain, or I can't remember where, but I remember there's a whole thing about the burials. But it's amazing how you see the power losing. Women are losing rights. You can tell this culturally, the rights change, the value changed to me. That rights didn't fall from value. So, but at 4,000 in Southeast Turkey, there's the first women's rights document in the world. And it's a treaty between them and Mesopotamia. What's interesting to me is that the fact that you needed one then shows that they already, at some point before that, obviously thought women probably had rights, I would assume. And so to me, I see it as the new violation is starting to occur. By 4,000 women, it's not assumed that women have rights. In fact, it's probably assumed that maybe they don't. So they had to actually write it down. So I just think it's interesting that, to me, and like you talk about the queens, there's queens at almost at 5,000, and there's ones from all the way down to about 2,000. To me, that's the point where women, in a sense, full sexism takes over by about 2,000, even in the Minoans, and Crete and everything. It's like the downfall from that point on. So I would say, to me, it's really the rise of hierarchy. It's the rise in the sense, like, because when a king happened, like in Egypt, before that, in a sense, a female could have been, a sense, a king, because there wasn't that, sense of label. Because even in Mesopotamia, they would use female goddesses to actually validate their kingship. I'm a priest king because of, But it's and also very interesting too. The oldest Sumerian, in a sense, deity, creator deity, was a female that was self-created and created the world by herself. So, anyways,
so
I'll cut ranting.
I was just going to say it's unfortunate that rise of male-dominated societies also corresponds with the emergence of the written word, because when culture and traditions are handed down via oral tradition, they can evolve as culture evolves, right? Kind of religion can evolve as culture evolves, gender roles can evolve. But when you have the written word, what happens is then ideas become static. They become developmentally arrested, right? And so that's how we end up then with this situation where these male-dominated cultures evolved among the shepherds of the ancient Near East, and then they get handed down via the written word through a variety of different settings, and that gender dynamic becomes static and frozen in time and developmentally arrested as well. And it's not really, if you think about it, we don't necessarily think about how much cultural evolution is bound to communications technologies. But it very much is. And when you look at something like the Bible, you have not only these specific texts that got written down and then became static, but then we have a gathering of those texts into a single book that also then becomes static. So the text is static, and then the collection itself has boundaries. There's no further revelation, and things get handed clear on down to the present. The first real change we have in that is now, for example, wikis, right? Because what's cool is now we have the ability that the written word gave us, which is to distribute ideas and information among people who don't know each other and across generations. Right. But it also it's a series of living documents that grow and change and put cultural evolution back in motion. And I don't think it's an accident that we are having this very intense complicated conversation about gender roles at a time when our communications technologies are also increasingly in motion.
Yeah, I just make a couple of comments. I think if you look back at the Paleolithic, and for these men who did the big animal hunting, and they would go out, and if they got stuck with a spear or something, they could bleed to death and die. They come back to the hearth in the cave, and the woman bleeds every month, and she doesn't die. So that alone has to go, wow, how can that happen? How can she bleed and not die? The other thing is that the menstrual cycles corresponded with the lunar cycles. Right. And we know that their reliance on nature and the earth, and it continuing itself, and that summer coming back every year was incredibly important. I think, and people will disagree with this, that at this time they may not have known the role of the male. But clearly, by the time we have early patriarchy, etc., man has figured out that his sperm contributes, and that's going to be his kid. And it wasn't even, I believe, the 18th century where they found the role of the egg. So we switch from a kind of a feminine-centric Mother Earth nature and flip it on its side. And it's fascinating. And the issue that Valerie raised, Lawrence Schlein wrote a book called The Alphabet and the Goddess. And he outlines exactly what Valerie's saying, is that nature, Mother Earth, the feminine divine, was very cyclical. It comes. And death and life are part of a cycle. And that's why you see the snake so often associated with the goddess, because it's this, they shed their skin, they come back. So there's those things that go together. And he basically says, when you go to linear, which is what writing is linear, it changes the way you think about things. Now there's a past, a future that you can kind of count out, if you will. So I think that's really, really interesting.
Yes, I agree. I appreciate your insights. And do you have any things that relate to the book that you want to share that are poignant?
Go ahead,
Either
Valerie.
of you is fine.
Well, I think what I'd like to do is, if my computer will let me toggle, I'd like to just actually read some of the
Please do.
quotes from the Bible that give us examples of what exactly down from the Iron Age, remembering that Christians perceive this. Not all of them. Many Christians understand this to be a human document. It's got human handprints all over it. You don't have to look very hard.
Easily.
And so many Christians do understand it as the struggle of our ancestors to understand what was real and what was good and how to live in moral community with each other. But there are a great number of others, as we know, about 30% of Americans who think that this book is the literally perfect word of God, essentially dictated by God to the writers through their own voices, but that they take this so seriously that pastors will spend, a week analyzing a few phrases in order to try and discern exactly what God's intention was. So here's some examples. One example of an idea from these Iron Age texts is the idea that a wife is a man's property. In the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, the rules that govern the well-being of women, if you look at them closely, are not human rights laws, they are property laws. Right. And that's illustrated by one of the 10 Commandments, which says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female slave, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Actually, it says servant, I guess, instead of slave, but there are other verses that talk specifically about slaves, and the boundary is sometimes unclear there. In Exodus, daughters can be bought and sold. It says in Exodus 21, if a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as male servants do. A raped daughter can be sold to her rapist, according to the book of Deuteronomy. Quote, if a man happens to meet a virgin who is not pledged to be married and rapes her and they are discovered, he shall pay her father 50 shekels of silver. He must marry the young woman, for he has violated her. He can never divorce her as long as he lives. So this is, I can't think of a worse nightmare than being forced to marry your rapist. Understand it in cultural context that this woman was now damaged goods, that if the role of women is to produce babies of known parentage, that she no longer kind of is purely available for that. But we've had examples in recent years where young women in the Muslim world committed suicide because they were forced by judges to marry men who had raped them. To continue on, in 1 Kings, collecting wives is seen as a sign of status. It says Solomon, who was the wisest man who ever lived, supposedly, had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. And, and concubines are literally sex slaves, right?
Yeah.
In Deuteronomy, it says that a used bride can be put to death. Quote, if there's a girl is married off and her husband says he doesn't think she's a virgin, they have this ritual for figuring out. It says, if the charge is true and no proof of the girl's virginity can be found, she shall be brought to the door of her father's house, and there the men of her town will stone her to death. And women, but only virgins, are taken as spoils of war along with other war booty. So we have the story of the Midianite virgins, where God's messenger says specifically, now kill all the boys and kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. So I'm going to pause there because I could go on, but seriously, that's 6 verses that, in the chapter that I wrote for Karen's book, there are many, many more. And these verses from the Bible are part of what inspired the church fathers and even modern ministers to say perfectly horrible things about women.
Yeah, there's a quote from Martin Luther that says, oh, well, if a woman dies in childbirth, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
And the Tertullian and all of those early church fathers were the most misogynistic writers that you can ever see. And I think that particularly today, I think a lot of people have trouble defending the Old Testament. They will go, well, that was the way it was back then, and it was written for that, and we got the New Testament, and Jesus stopped the girl from being stoned. Of course, he didn't change the law. I mean, if he wasn't, he would have been dead later.
And that's such a cop-out. Okay, now, Karen, I have to go and read some New Testament verses since you brought that up, because it's a total cop-out. 1 Corinthians 14:34. Women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. Colossians 3:18. Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting to the Lord. Ephesians 5:22. Wives, submit to your own husbands as you do to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of his body. Now the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands for everything. So here you see this hierarchy, right? You have God, then you have man who's made in the image of God, and then you have woman, and I could quote other verses, and children and slaves and other species. But this thing about submission and goes on in the New Testament. 1 Timothy 2, a woman should learn and not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet, for Adam was formed first and then Eve, and Adam was not deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. But women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith and love and holiness with propriety.
Well, and I think it's real interesting when you look at the origin of the Old Testament. If you look and understand that the Israelites, if we want to call them that, Hebrews, went to Babylon and were held in captivity. And that's really where Karen Strong, who's a scholar, says she thinks the first 5 books of the Bible were finalized. Well, look what's happening in Babylon. You have got, and I think you mentioned this earlier, Damien, you've got Tiamat, who is this creator of earth, parts the seas, whatever, and it's a female character. And then Marduk is one of the male gods, because at this time we have a mix of male and female. And Marduk says to his fellow male gods, hey, if you make me top dog, I will kill Tiamat. And so they say, oh, sure, we'll go along with you, Marduk, no problem. And they kill Tiamat, slice her up. It's similar to the story of Leviathan in the Old Testament. And so the Hebrews were going through the same thing in Canaan, because there were goddesses there. Asherah was a goddess, a Canaanite goddess that was worshipped often with a tree. And again, goddesses associated with snakes. So you see these people writing, trying to understand why they lost this war and why they're in Babylon. Oh, we got to really get rid of anything female. And the Old Testament is filled with struggling to get rid of their people worshiping goddesses. You've got Jeremiah 44, where they say, we're going back to worship the Queen of Heaven because we're not doing well and we're going to make cakes, etc. And none of that was edited out. It's really fascinating. And even today we have the Catholic Church who said, a woman can't be pope, a woman can't be a priest. I think it's fascinating to see how women who have, learned more about women's roles still are in church today, and haven't given it up.
It all goes back to that very, very simple basic principle of might makes right, and the idea that because men are more physically strong than women, they get to be in charge, they get to write the rules, they get to rule society. And you see that then encoded in the Bible as this sort of divine mandate, right? They don't attribute it to physical strength, and yet what you see also is that the two are very, very intertwined. So the idea that if you are righteous, then you win wars, right? That God is on your side in killing people, and one of the way you know someone's righteous is because they win. It goes. Even I look how very much we are so infused with this idea of might makes right that even if you look at 2 very recent superhero movies, right? Superwoman and Black Panther, that are radical in that they have Black and female heroes. But the one kind of thing that we don't question is this idea that if good guys are actually good, then they win, right? And one of the ways you know that they're good is that they won.
Yeah, that's
and so there is this really unchallenged assumption that physical strength or power or the ability to defeat someone physically goes together with having the right to do that and being righteous and being good. That the idea that good physically wins out in the long run.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I wanted to bring up several issues you guys talked about. So one thing to me, you keep saying snakes. I see snakes actually going back to the first worship of a snake. The first worship of a stone snake is 70,000 years ago in South Africa. So, and to me, I see the original connection of snake to goddess is actually the umbilical cord. It's the umbilical cord straight to the child. That's why the thought that a snake can give life, because the snake is the umbilical cord. So that to me, I agree. The fall of women, or the beginning of the fall, or the realization that women didn't deserve. Not that I don't think this, but I'm saying that in the religious mindset at the time, at 12,000 years ago in Göbekli Tepe, you see a lot of imagery of birth and stuff. And to me, there's also the first what I see as the breaking of women into two pieces. The good girl and the bad girl starts about 12,000 years ago. One is the non-sexual mother. The other one is, in a sense, like a whore or whatever, or a woman who's open to have sex or whatever, a willing one. So, because they have a picture of a woman with her legs open and it shows her genitalia very pronounced, like she's being available. And there's other stuff of giving birth and a woman in a position of power even, because at 10,000, there's already women sitting on a throne. And she has two leopards on each side of her. And to me, that's the oldest goddess that then becomes the one the Sumerians take. And how Crete gets to be so religious, the Minoans, the DNA is from Turkey, 9,000 something years ago. I think it's 100. They went over to Crete, and then they started later to become the Minoans. And then from there, Crete got taken over by Greece. But Greece was already being influenced by Turkey anyways. And to me, Turkey gets its influence actually probably from Siberia. And I think there's a connection to Siberia, Inner Mongolia, China, to actually Egypt to me. It seems like there's some sort of a connection. This is important to me because it's the shared transfer of religion. Because shamanism is up in the north, and it basically, to me, turns into paganism during agriculture. Because to me, if you look at all the wheat and barley and all goddess, they're all connected to goddesses. So to me, and the oldest wheat is something like, I think, 16,000. So it slowly becomes, and also up there in the Taurus Mountains, southeast Turkey, the thunder. So to me, there's a book someone wrote called The Goddess and the Bull, and it's all about cattle hawk and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but that's in Catalhoyuk. And yeah, so I know a lot of stuff. But I don't focus so much on hearing the name because I read like archaeological stuff. I don't get really into other people telling me ideas. I like to go see the ideas myself. It's just my own personal preference. So a lot of the stuff that I just read. I've done tons of research, probably 10,000 articles on archaeology and several books, and all as an autodidact. I want to know. I want to know, how did this start?
It's fascinating. Well, I think one of the things Marie Buddhist, who is an archaeologist, who kind of one of the first women really well-known archaeologists, I mean, her hypothesis, which Joseph Campbell agrees with, is that there were these northern tribes called, she names them the Kurgans, who came down with the Kurgans, sky god representing the thunderbolts, etc. And that
well, the Kurgan is actually the burial mound, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that image, for a while, it subsisted, or it got along with the goddess, but then eventually it took over. So we have a goddess, then we have a pantheon, and then we have what we talked about in Babylonia, where you take and you have monotheism. And I think what's fascinating about the story of Eve is it's the perfect reverse tableau of the goddess. You have the earth, you have a garden, right. You have a tree, you have a woman. All of those things, the snake, all of those were feminine images.
True.
And then you make them bad. So you took that whole tableau of the goddess and flipped it around. And it's fascinating. It's one of the reasons that I couldn't read the Bible to my son. I thought it might be helpful for literature, but my explanations were so long, it would have taken us, a week to do one verse or something like that. And he didn't go into literature, so we're okay.
Oh, I bought a children's Bible for my daughters because I felt like I read them the mythology of all of these other cultures, and I wanted them to have some awareness of and familiarity with the mythologies that are so foundational to our own culture.
Right.
And I started reading those stories, and I've read a few of them, and then at some point, a woman's name is mentioned, and I forget even who it was, maybe Rachel or someone, and one of my daughters says, "Oh, let me guess. She's pregnant." And they say, let me guess. She's going to have a boy baby, isn't she? And her boy baby is going to go on to do great things and to be and they were, whatever they were, 6 and 8, they figured it out right away, and they were done. They were just done.
That is so amazing. I was raised in a Lutheran church, and when my sister and I get together every now and again in a car so nobody hears us if we're off key, we sing the music we sang and all of that stuff. But I'll tell you, for me, the biggest problem that I think is, kind of what Candace talks about is this shame and guilt, and it has to do with sex and being a virgin. Yep. And, I was born a long time ago, and I think that's the one thing from religion that really impacted my life the most. I never had any sex education. There was nothing in school. I learned about intercourse from reading Harold Robbins' 79 Park Avenue, where a shop owner rapes a girl. I mean, that was my introduction to sex. I always joke about, I asked my mother at the zoo once why the llamas were riding piggyback, and she wouldn't tell me. So that is so pervasive when you grow up learning a story where you're wrong, sex is wrong, marriage is the only way, and that keeps getting told to you. It's very difficult to go back and change that. And I think we see that with mental illness too. If somebody is in an abusive household, a child, and sees whether it's the man or woman beating the other, or they're beating each other up, that affects their psyche.
Oh, yeah.
And that's going to be there a long time. So those impressions we get and what we're taught when we're young are very hard to let go of.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was actually raised in a religious cult until 13. And I didn't see TV. We was like kind of like a Jehovah's Witness. We didn't celebrate birthdays. And it was horrific. My dad took the radio out of my mom's car so that she didn't accidentally be tempted to listen to ungodly music. And so, I lived in an absolute brutal lifestyle. And I think education is so important. I didn't have any real education, and my parents didn't care much about school. I did absolutely god awful in school. I mean, I should have. In fact, I so-called graduated high school. When I went to the Job Corps, they made me take high school again because they said, you don't know what you're talking about. So, I mean, it was like, but the reason why my parents didn't care was religion related. Because they felt that Jesus was going to come back before I left high school. Why go to school? Why even care that much? It's not really that important. But it's that toxic removal of education that kept me till 35 until I realized I needed to be an atheist just because I needed to follow the truth of reality. But until that point, I had thought that Christianity, some versions are wrong. And I thought, well, my parents had it wrong. And, that somehow that there may have been still some truth somewhere. And, and I went to college to be a drug and alcohol counselor because I wanted to help people. Also, I'd injured in a truck accident, so my foot has nerve damage. I needed something that wasn't involving so much labor. And I also had helped people as a truck driver and realized I really like helping people. And I seem to be good at teaching or inspiring others to learn. And so I went to counseling, school, and then all of a sudden they said, well, if you're going to be a drug and alcohol counselor, you got to take classes on religion because you got to deal with people's higher powers, You can't just say everyone has to be a Christian. And so, but when I took the classes one after another, all of a sudden I realized it's all the same. All of them, every single religion has these things where they tell you their way is the way to the better life. Their way is the only way to the afterlife. to have it, be a good one, whatever they call it. But it's this singleness. Because they made us do 10 classes in 10 weeks, sort of like, and having to do that, it wasn't to debunk them, it was just explaining them. We needed to understand, because we needed to understand others. But because I had to do it that way, which I never would have done, and I actually did not want to do the class. When I did that, it allowed me to see, and I realized if they're all wrong, maybe mine's wrong. How do I even know mine's right?
Yeah.
And so then they're learning more stuff about the Bible, but it was so profound for me because, a lot of people talk about Islam and Christianity as being sexist, but I never hear much about other things. So I put it on myself, and I debunked every major religion in the world and showed how it has sexism, every single one. Nice little blog on each one. I sent it to you before, Karen. A lot of people don't realize that, yeah, I took time on each one, on Jainism, on Sikhism, on Buddhism, on Hinduism, I even show shamanism. People always think that shamanism is always good. The Pawnee Indians used to have a thing called the star ceremony where they would get a spirit dream, go capture a woman, put her and torture her to death. I mean, it's like, and just think people are with Genghis Khan. I mean, he was a shaman, So but I'm not saying that shamanism is inherently bad. I'm just saying this thinking that only certain religions are like inherently bad, I find just ridiculous, uninformed. Just like, to me, the most toxic thing, you're talking about children, and in my own personal life, is the harm of children. Because it personally happened to me, I have even a more passion to make it never happen again. I tell people, I'm fine if you want to believe, but I'm not fine if you want to indoctrinate your children, especially to the point of actually intellectual abuse. Not letting me understand the world was an intellectual abuse. Now, you can tell me to interpret it some way that you want because you give me an idea, but to remove my right to even know, and like I was saying at the beginning, how I think we can empower women, we have to empower them. We have to empower them with education. We got to give them a voice. We got to give them a platform. We got to listen to them. So,
yeah, Valerie, what do you think? If you had a guess, how long it would take the United States to become like Norway in terms of its religious faith? What will it take?
What would it take? Well, I think, I honestly don't know.
And I think that what we're seeing is a tremendous increase in young people moving out of religion. But what we also have is, in a sense, it's the middle of the road folks. It's the people who had one tone in the water, were moderately religious, were willing to kind of say, well, the Bible's not all literally true, but there's lots of good in it. That kind of folks are leaving religion at a higher rate than some of the more fundamentalist groups. And I think it's because they have these cultural boundaries and that kind of very specifically threaten people who leave or erect barriers to people being exposed to external information, the kind of be ye not unequally yoked idea, or the idea like that you see in Pentecostalism, that there is this spiritual war going on a different plane, and anybody who's not on God's side, meaning a born-again Christian, is on the side of the devil and should be treated with suspicion, right? So I think it's going to be a long time before we have a Norwegian level of secularism and people are able to move on. The other thing I think is that there's a lot of other kinds of faith-based superstition in this country that seems very appealing to the American mind, whether we're talking about anti-vaxxer stuff or whether we're, kind of talking about new agey spiritual beliefs, or whether we're talking about the way that some even of, I kind of speaking from the left of the political spectrum, some of the beliefs that people are taking on as kind of political activism sometimes take on a remarkably almost religious quality to them in terms of there being dogmas and prophets and kind of a lack of ability to question that, right? And the kind of strong insider and outsider mentality. So there are dynamics that go beyond just the content of Christianity. Christianity has created a sort of a mental
a mindset that even when you strip that content out, sometimes the architecture of belief is still there. And I'm not sure how that's all going to play out.
Well, and I think the other issue, too, is political. I mean, I got involved in this whole effort about 4 years ago because of the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Burwell v. Hobby Lobby, where basically in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court said because of the religious views of Hobby Lobby, I mean, a company has religious views, they don't have to provide certain forms of birth control to their female employees. And if you look at the structure of our society today and where the power is, I mean, I don't know, is there somebody that's a kind of atheist in Congress? There's might be somebody who's close there, but I would never get elected to Congress. I mean, everyone knows I'm an atheist. That's not going to happen. So we have our structure, whether it's economic or political or religion, et cetera, they're all together. And I think it's not just, yes, I'd like to break religion, but it's inherent in all of these other places as well. So I kind of agree with Valerie. It's so deeply embedded. Now we've got Billy Graham laying in state at, who would have thought about that would ever happen? So I'm concerned. I'm really concerned politically with the change in the Supreme Court. Another real conservative on there. I remember before Roe v. Wade, I remember being in Seattle, your town, Damien, and I was at a Luther League convention. Yeah. Took the train for 2 days, couldn't walk in the hotel afterwards. I was, you kind of go like this. And I walked into my hotel room with somebody else, and the bed had not been slept in, and we went in the bathroom, and there was blood all over a towel on the floor. So whether it was or not, my first impression was somebody came here to have an abortion. Wow. And abortion will be there. It's always been there. It's a question as to whether they're going to be safe or not safe, and legal, not legal. And unless you have an autonomy of your body, I don't know how we can move forward. And for a male, it's like saying, hey, nobody can go take your sperm, make a child out of it, make you raise that child. Yeah. You'd have a fit if that happened. Well, guess what? Same thing. And we can invest more in birth control so it doesn't happen. But I just think if you don't have bodily autonomy, it's really hard to move from there. And then, of course, we have the whole economic structure, which is concentrated in the hands of a few, which also, wants to continue things the way they are because they've been successful that way. So I just think there's a huge amount of. Anyway, I don't want to end on a negative note, so somebody say something positive before we quit.
Well, I don't think it's a negative note, because to me, the empowerment and the enlightenment of people, although sometimes can be shocking, is usually healthy. In other words, like, say if I have gangrene, I go to the doctor, I can't say, doctor, don't touch the gangrene, but please cure me. He's going to say, no, I got to cut off the gangrene, or you're going to die, or have to lose a limb or whatever. So to me, the society is toxic. That doesn't mean we have to respond in kind. And that's really my thing. I am a firebrand atheist. I'm an anarchist, but I'm also a humanist. And my goal is humanitarianism, not even just humanism. I really want the world to be benefited universally. I really want human flourishing on a planet level. I want everybody to do good. And, so to me, that means that we have to look at the bright side. It's not a dark thing. I don't think that fighting oppression is something we should be fearful of. We should feel empowered by. I am proud of myself that I'm a champion for kindness and a champion for justice. I mean, that is something to feel good about, I think.
I think one of the great things about leaving behind the Bible and all of those Iron Age scripts is that we aren't bound to this idea of chosen people, right? And God-appointed hierarchies that makes some lives more valuable than others because some people are more like God than other people are. So we get really to move outside of that and then to think about how do we create a kind of vibrant global web in which people can flourish and can live the lives of their choosing. And that seems like an incredible gift. And, there's as Damien said, there's a lot of rocky spots along the way, and it's upheaval, and kind of some toes are going to have to be cut off. but there's also incredible hope and promise in that, because we are no longer tethered to the limitations and the kind of limited worldview of our Iron Age ancestors.
Well, and I think, I look back at I've had a number of careers. I kind of got bored every 7-8 years, so I had to change it. And, I feel good about what I've done in my career, but leaving a legacy of these books makes me feel the best.
Yeah.
To do that, to get these great women authors together to talk about, the impact on Hispanics and African Americans and transgender. One of the things I'm doing with this book is I'm trying to interest universities who have women and gender studies program to use this as a textbook, maybe for a class or maybe for extra credit, et cetera. I don't know how you can study the status of women today without looking at the role of religion. It's just too big a piece to ignore.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to continue that. And Damien, I really want to say I really appreciate your having us on. You were the second one we've been on for this book.
Right on.
And we're just going to plow forward. So you get a prize.
Thank you. Well, it's an honor. Much. Yeah, it's an honor to help you both.
Thanks.
And I want to say that I personally am thankful, to both of you for being, activists for feminism and atheism together, because I feel like, especially since Trump, and I'm a leftist. I mean, to me, Bernie Sanders is a moderate, just so you know. I mean, I'm leftist as hell, and I'm not even ashamed of it. I'm a revolutionary. I want
I have my Bernie sweatshirt. I have my Bernie.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying I don't like Bernie. I'm just saying I'm even farther than Bernie. Bernie would be like have to catch up to me. But anyways, but he wants to have what he would consider realistic solutions, and what I say is the call of freedom is not unrealistic. So
that's a great sentence.
So to me, we rise by helping each other, and I mean the whole planet. And I look, just imagine if we were to actually utilize the potential that women already possess. What could we do? I would say the easiest thing for me to tell a country that's not doing well is how it treats its women. Because almost always, the more oppressed the women are, the more potential for torture accepted in the general public. I can see it. I can see these countries that you see them, that the women losing more power, all of a sudden everybody starts getting hurt more. It becomes more dangerous for almost anybody that's not in the power. And to me, that just shows that, that we should do the exact opposite. Empower women, thus we all are empowered. That's my thoughts.
Well, thank you. And I just mentioned the book again, is Women versus Religion, a case against faith and for freedom. Again, available on Amazon. And thank you very much. And when you get the links up, you send them out. We'll put them on our social media.
Right on.
And Valerie, thank you again. This is our second one we've done together. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, everybody, it's been wonderful, and have a great day.